It's across the studio. James Creedon is waiting for us. Good evening, sir.
Hi, Mark.
Lots of cartoons and images and reaction, of course. We're 5 years on from the attacks on Charlie Hebdo, the satirical magazine here in France. Je suis Charlie became one of the hashtags of the moment. And, of course, protests 5 years ago. It's all been resurrected today.
It has indeed, Mark. So the slogans that we became so familiar with at that time, that became a kind of a clarion call for freedom of speech, even if it's defending what can be offensive to many. The principle of freedom of speech sort of being a superior principle than the need to kind of have sensitivities for people's beliefs and whatnot. Je suis toujours Charlie is what some have been sharing as well. I am still Charlie 5 years on. And why are they saying that? Well, we might get to that in a moment, because it should seem obvious that you would still hold that belief if you kind of held it 5 years ago. But things have changed somewhat. This is another cartoon by Randy Bish, an American editorial cartoonist for the Pittsburgh Tribune Review. So all of these cartoons, as I said, are reappearing, not all of them, but many of them. He came at me with a pencil. So the whole notion of the opposition of a pencil or a pen or a paintbrush and a gun, and the unequal nature of the two, and how a sort of equivalence emerged, in the sense that the pen was being fought with the gun, and then, of course, the response by many was the pen is in some ways mightier than the sword. So there was that whole debate about freedom of speech and the importance of protecting the freedom of expression. Je suis Charlie, you can see there the rifle and the pencil sort of doing battle, if you like. And this was Plan 2, the cartoonist for Le Monde, his rendering of, I suppose, sentiments 5 years back. That's his cartoon from then, which he retweeted today. Marianne in the centre, the symbol of Republic, of the French Republic, of freedom, essentially, of French principles, holding a pencil aloft. And also today, this is a French cartoonist, Chonu, Emmanuel Chonu, showing Lady Liberty, or the Statue of Liberty, bending over and lighting candles in the forms.
It looks like an Eiffel Tower to me, that.
Pencils. There you go. That's what I meant in the Eiffel Tower, bending over to light those candles. This one is a little bit more risque, Mark. It's
Isn't it just?
It's the sort of rendering of one of the jihadists. I suppose it's an artist's interpretation of who might have participated in such an attack, and how some might have felt about that. And how it's still there 5 years on.
Indeed.
Perhaps not the classiest cartoon of all time.
Okay.
Indeed.
Well, it sums up what some people are thinking, certainly, and how some people feel about what happened. And I mean, clearly there's an element of that. And Charlie Hebdo at the time, of course, when it came back for its first edition after the attacks, depicted Mohammed on the front of the newspaper, which is one of the problems that the perpetrators of the atrocity said was wrong. That you shouldn't draw Muhammad, and this is something that many Muslims say is wrong.
Right.
But they did it again with Muhammad holding a sign saying "Tout est pardonné," everything's forgiven.
Everything's been forgiven.
And again, I take it this is now Charlie Hebdo's reaction today.
So I suppose, their front pages could be very offensive, and it brought up the whole question of being offensive and not being respectful versus freedom of speech and what should be protected more. Here is the new context, I suppose, 5 years on, which by stealth we have arrived at. New censorship, new dictatorships from the point of view of Charlie Hebdo. You can see here the idea of smartphones and social media and false and fake news, and the crackdown on hate speech and fake news online. Some feeling, well, Charlie Hebdo clearly feeling that this is a form of censorship in itself, and that it goes against the spirit of, I suppose, the whole Je suis Charlie movement. Elsewhere, you have this rendering of a cartoon. So Je suis Charlie version 2015, or I suppose at the time of the attacks, and Je suis Charlie now. So what was once a pencil is now seen as somewhat of a prickly topic, that could be interpreted as, perhaps. The defence of freedom of expression has become something that is not as simple as it might have seemed at the time. This is a Dutch cartoonist, and his rendering of things. What was Je suis Charlie, we are all Charlie, turned into Are we Charlie? I'm not actually Charlie, you are Charlie. And so the inversion of the principles that were being defended at that time is the message, I think, of that. I mean,
even at the time of the attacks 5 years ago, I can recall talking to some friends who were Muslim who were saying, no, I've never been Charlie, and what they do is wrong.
Yeah.
There's always been this controversial feeling about what they do, how they do it, and the means they use to achieve what they see as their aim, to push the boundaries of freedom of speech, to push what is the truth, and to not respect anybody either way, just going forward the story, as it were, in that sense.
And actually, it is worth mentioning that 5 years ago, it was a debate. It's not like everybody was just Sue Charlie, as you said. Sure. And one point of view that actually challenged it was, is being resurrected here, an Al Jazeera English presenter, Mehdi Hassan. So the person who tweeted this screen grab was actually criticising his point of view. But it's worth giving his point of view. As a Muslim, I'm fed up with the hypocrisy of the free speech fundamentalists, he said. I do not believe that a right to offend automatically translates into a duty to defend, he said. I disagree with the notion that, in other words, what he was saying is that there is a responsibility that accompanies freedom of expression and that you shouldn't sort of poke sore.
Got you completely.
We
should always point out, for his sake, that what he said at the top is, let's be clear, I agree, there's no justification whatsoever for gunning down journalists or cartoonists. So
I'll mention 2-3 things very quickly. You remember the New York Times got rid of their weekly cartoon after a controversy concerning this cartoon, where it was seen as anti-Semitic, an anti-Semitic trope. Now, many people were critical of that, even if the cartoon itself can be criticised. For example, Plantour in France, who said that it was stupid of the New York Times to ban cartoons in the aftermath of this controversy. It did lead to a lot of discussion about whether or not we are seeing the end of satire and political cartoons. As one article here in the New York Times said, there's not much time to go into it more than just to say the rules of the games are changing. You've got a lot of, with social media and whatnot, it's much more difficult to kind of identify satire and distinguish it from hate speech and deep fakes and all of the rest.
I was going to say, but it gets hit by this massive tidal wave of fake news that sort of swamps the social media scenarios. It is hard to separate those, and some people, I think, do get caught up with what's fact and what isn't, and what's fiction, and what could be a contortion of all three, or if you like.
That's right.
James, as ever, a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so very much indeed. James Creedon with the Media Watch. Great to see you, sir.